So today I'm going to be speaking to my good friend Will about how he became a Christian, and it is an extraordinary story. Check it out right here, right now. Hi, welcome to the channel. My name is Dan Beasley, and this channel is all about inspiring intentional discipleship, helping you go deeper in your faith and living it out in the world today. If there's one person I know who has gone deeper in his faith over the years that I've known him, it's Will, who's got an extraordinary story of his family being Christian and you kind of going all over the place, and then suddenly one day telling me he's Christian, which blew my mind, and now hearing extraordinary stories about how you're going to live your faith out in the world today. Completely extraordinary. So we're going to get into that today. We're going to hear your testimony, and we're just going to see where this conversation goes. So just a bit of context, me and Will have known each other and our families for about 10 years now. We used to live a couple of miles from each other. Our kids went to the same preschool, and then you abandoned us and moved all the way down to the south coast, and too much of the Christianity. I was a Christian when we met. Really early days Christian. Yes. And you would probably, what would you consider yourself?
I was pretty atheist when we first met.
Pretty atheist. And so if you know my testimony, I was an atheist and I became a Christian, and I was probably one of those full-on Christians as well.
You were a little bit full-on, yeah.
To you as a, but the thing is, coming up against Will is, and it's a huge part of your testimony, you were growing up in a missionary family, and your grandfather and your father and your mom as well was all in there. So your knowledge of the Bible was very different to mine, because I didn't have that upbringing.
I had some background.
Yeah,
you had I kind of learnt by osmosis from all these
which
people.
you amazingly used. So I go see Will with all this kind of like, Bible. And Will go, no, this is what it actually says. And I go home and go, no. But that was part of the thing. So tell us your testimony. What was it going back? Where did it start for you?
So I grew up a Christian. So as you said, my grandfather was a missionary in Argentina for 42 years, and he and my grandmother helped start churches. They helped found the main seminary in Buenos Aires, I believe. They did lots of extraordinary things out there. My parents went to be missionaries in Brazil, so I kind of grew up in this Christian culture. And I think, to give a bit of background where we met, by the time of high school, I was getting a little bit shaky with Christianity, and I was asking a lot of questions, and I wasn't really feeling like I was getting the answers I wanted. And by university, I studied anthropology and history. And the thing about studying anthropology is that you then start studying other religions, you start studying other worldviews, and you study them with a certain preconception in mind, which is where we're Enlightenment Westerners, we have all the answers, and these interesting religious people are all just sort of seeking after some numinous metaphysical experience, but we know better. And so I just started to internalize that worldview. I also had some questions about why things go wrong, and I found atheist answer quite compelling. You know, the universe just doesn't care about you. It's just a fluke, and you just got to muddle through with your life until the end, and that's it. And so I, from that point on, just didn't bother. I just drifted away, moved off. I went to do archaeology in Belize, which is where I met Eddie, my wife now. We moved to the UK, and I lived quite happily as an agnostic, and then I kind of vacillated between agnosticism and atheism and agnosticism, and by the time we met, I'd kind of gone quite atheistic. I'd gone quite hard, and I just decided, you know what, I'm pretty certain now of my position and my view on this. And
how was it then? Did you kind of come out, as it were, to your parents and your grandparents? Did you say, look?
No, I just sort of drifted off, and part of the benefit, I guess, of moving country is that you just leave. And so I just left anyway. So it wasn't like they went, "Oh, Will's left the church." They just sort of went off.
Did they know?
And I think they kind of knew. We never really talked about it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was one of those things where they kind of knew I was doing my own thing. They knew I had a bit of a wild time at university.
Yeah.
But you know, it's just one of those things. They were far away, and they were quite focused on just sort of, well, what's your life? How are you getting on? How's work? And it never came up, and I just let it go. really. And it wasn't until really Ellie started thinking about it and you came into my life that I started to think about it again, actually.
Through the so like I said, we're quite familiar because the knowledge of the Bible, that what you grow up with, and I suppose that kind of that impacting of living in Argentina as a missionary family, growing up in that environment, your dad being a scholar.
Yes, and it's interesting. I've spoken to a lot of people about this who grew up in similar environments, and they found it quite inspiring. So they found like it helped their faith.
Yeah.
And for me, it just had the opposite effect. It didn't seem to sink in as I got older. And like I said to you earlier, I've been reflecting on this and thinking, well, maybe something was wrong with my perception. Because in my youth group, a number of my friends went on to become pastors and ministers, and I was just like, no, I'm done. I'm out of here. I'm not buying it. And and I remember quite distinctly, actually, I was talking about anthropology. I remember one class in particular where we were looking at religious syncretism, and I remember thinking, you know what, I think I'm just going to drop this, and you leave it. But then when you came into my life, and Ellie, by the way, had also been kind of pulling me a little bit. So I had two people in my life saying, look, maybe you should look at this again and don't be so sure of yourself. All the while I'd been developing a career as an archaeologist, and there's some things in archaeology that make you think about the world and think about evidence in a way that's a little bit different, I think, to what a lot of people look at it. We're quite used to not just digging up evidence and looking at it, but understanding the nature of the evidence and understanding what it is you can infer from evidence and what you can't. Right. And one of the things you also understand in archaeology is that a technique may give you some answers, but it won't give you all answers. So you have different archaeological field investigations. They all have different approaches. So you might have a LiDAR scan or geophysical survey or trial trenching. All those things have the ability to tell you something quite specific about the archaeological potential of a site. Yep. But none of them give you a complete picture of what's under there. Mm-hmm. And so it struck me, I think, quite forcefully after you'd been going on at me a few times when we got together. I've been reading a book by Raymond Tallis called The Kingdom of Infinite Space, which if you're ever interested in a book about the brain, it's a very good one. Yeah. But at the end, he has a little chapter about how he just didn't see a case for a creator or a soul or anything. And it struck me quite forcefully as an atheist that I just didn't quite buy his reasoning, because I felt that it was more of an assertion. And maybe the archaeologist in me was thinking, wait a minute, absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. And when someone says, well, there's no evidence for this, the question you ought to ask yourself is, well, how hard have you looked? Yeah. And how carefully have you looked? Yeah. And by what means have you looked? So if I'm got an archaeological site and someone says, well, there's no evidence as any archaeology here, I'm like, yes, but have you done a geophysical survey? Have you done trial trenching? Mm-hmm. What have you done? And if you have evidence to substantiate that, that's fine. It's one thing to say there's no evidence when you've looked. It's another to say there's no evidence when you haven't. And it struck me that the nature of the evidence gathering that had happened there wasn't sufficient to substantiate the position he held.
So did that compel you then to go, have I looked?
Yeah, it really
and
did.
Then and go back, and so what did, so from a more methodical approach, I would say, which I had when I came, because the funny thing is I did archaeology as well. It was one of the common things we had, and Ellie, and when we met, Ellie was very much searching, and you weren't. She had a lot of questions, and I think the influence of a wife or a husband who was searching and on the other one is quite profound, and I've seen that again and again, and it's how it's kind of put across and communicate, and having the right people around, but with that as one aspect, but in your mind, did you take a methodical approach and go, right, okay, I'm going to look at this. These are the questions. Well, what were your questions? Because usually people got questions. Mine was like Jesus and the reliability of the Bible. Those are my two biggest things. Did you have something that was like, right, okay, I need to answer this?
For me, it was sort of, is God real and present? And I mean, sometimes people have this sort of idea, abstraction of God. And I was thinking, yeah, that's all fine, but is God really there? Can we know that? Can we have some certainty on that? Yeah. And that was a big question for me. If God is there, if God is real, if there is a creator, and if God loves us and cares for us and does something, that does change everything, and it forces you to then reevaluate everything else. It all hinged for me on that question: is it reasonable? Is it warranted to believe in God? So that was the thing that I started thinking, well, okay, maybe I should think about it. Because Eddie was quite certain that God existed. You were quite certain that God existed. Having read that, not straight away, but as I read, I thought, I'm not sure the case against is as strong as I assumed it was.
Right.
And I had new sort of mindset, new mental skills, as it were, for my profession to start thinking about, okay, well, maybe I'll look into it. I'll read up a little bit on philosophy. I'll look up resources and see what people are saying about why they think God exists, and I'll see what people are saying about why God might not exist, and I'll see which one looks to me like they've actually evaluated the evidence, they've thought about it in different ways from different angles.
Yeah.
Because for example, another analogy, if you've got something like scientific dating, which I know some people find contentious, but the reason a lot of people think is validated and true is that you can cross-reference different techniques. So you can date a strata in geology using one technique, and then date it using a different technique, and date it using it, and then you get these crossovers, and then that it gives you increased confidence that you've got the right date, because you've got these different things telling you the same thing from different methodological approaches. So in the same way, I was kind of thinking, okay, if something's got truth to it, usually it doesn't matter which way. Like if I've got a piece of pottery there in its Bronze Age, I can look at that pottery this way. I can look at the shape of it, and that will be Bronze Age. I can look at the temper in the fabric, and that will be the Bronze Age method. I use grog tempering or whatever. And I can take the little stones from the temper, and I can show it to a specialist geologist, and they'll peer at it and say, well, that's from this region, and that matches what we understand about. So you have these different ways of looking at the same bit of evidence. They'll all point you in the same direction. So I guess instinctively I was looking for that. I was looking for me, there is something real and true in the world, and archaeology is very clear on that. It's a discipline that values and just assumes that there is an objective fact that you're dealing with. You found this artifact, you found this environmental sample, you found this feature, there it is, deal with it. And okay, fair enough, you might then have to say something about, well, what does it mean and why is it there? But that's kind of separate. It's another question. One question is it there? The other question is, what is it, and why is it there?
It's kind of building up that, comes to mind, Ravi Zacharias tells us, if you go to like Mars or somewhere, something like that, it's a story like this, and you find stones, or you see stones, they're just stones. But if they're pointing in a triangle, you can go, well, that could just be random. It could be pointing in a triangle. But then if you walk and follow that triangle, and at the end of the triangle it says, hello, Will, we've been waiting for you. You get to a point and go, that could be random. But now it's like gone beyond the point where I can explain this away. So it was a kind of like, the more that you brought different strands together, it was then harder to... Okay, the biggest thing, and for me, were you looking for this? Because I wasn't looking for this. I was trying to affirm my atheism.
Do you know what? I wasn't trying to affirm. I was just in a point in my life where I kind of was just looking around. Like, when you get to a point in your life when you think, your 20s, you think you've got it all figured out, and then you get a bit older and you think, oh, there's more going on in the world, there's more questions. And I was reading books about the brain, I was reading books about the cosmos, I was reading all sorts of interesting things. And this just became another thing. I thought, I'm reading about the universe, I'm reading about physics, I'm reading about the human brain and mind and all these things. Maybe I ought to have a bit of thinking about these metaphysical questions, because, like I said before, I realized, and it wasn't straight away, it wasn't like I read that book and straight away went, oh my word, I must now seek the truth. It was kind of I'd read it and went, interesting, closed it, weeks go by, Eddie would prod me again, you'd prod me again, but then that time you'd prod me, I'd be a bit less certain. I'd be going, well, to be fair, I read this book and actually I'm not really sure now. So maybe I need to look again. So after a while I started to go,
that never came across.
Really?
Yeah, at all. I remember like just going to your place and like I said, coming away, just like your knowledge of the Bible and stuff, and me being over enthusiastic and just I know it all now. I just coming away just going was like, maybe if there was chipping away, it was not. I think quite back then you're quite like I wouldn't even have noticed. And I mean, we spoke about this yesterday. Is one of the biggest moments for me, I just put my hands up to you, and I don't know if you remember this. I do. I just went, Will, I can't argue. I mean, like, I'm not arguing with you anymore because you are just amazing, you know. And I remember one time, like, when you came around the house and we had a friend there, and you said, I got 3 arguments against your point. And you didn't, you had one, and you were just thinking on the spot for the other 2.
Making it up, yeah.
Exactly. And that's like, wow, how can you argue against it? And I'm saying to you, that's it. I'm just going to live my life as a Christian, and that's going to be my argument, and you're going to have to deal with that, because the more I go deeper in my faith and living it out, that's going to challenge you. And you went, like, that's the best thing anyone ever said, because I wasn't meeting you where you are. I wasn't getting into your ring, you know, and getting beaten up. Like, it's like, now you're going to come into my world, and it's not intellectual here. This is just like, I'm going to go and just step out in faith, and I'm going to often be a vicar. I think this was even before I was even looking, you know, at discernment and becoming a vicar. So I did go off and live that out, and I think it's interesting how we can, when we deal with people, I suppose, find, like, your biggest strength was your intellect.
Possibly, but maybe. Well, it's interesting you say that, because I remember that, and I remember you making that commitment, and it did strike me, because when you see someone makes a decision to follow through on what they believe, the act is quite powerful. And you kind of think, this person's got this certainty from somewhere. Certainty can still be misplaced, by the way, but you know, it does make you think, well, and you were a good friend by then, and Ellie respected you, and I thought, I'll have a look, and it did give me pause for thought. And you don't know how people are on the inside, and actually, I don't think we know ourselves sometimes. So some of the things which I now understand about that process, I didn't really understand, because sometimes we don't really know ourselves as we go out in the world. We're out there, we're doing stuff, and then you look back afterwards and you go, oh yeah, that's why I did that, you know? So I think there was an element of that as well. I'm looking back now and I'm thinking, actually, no, it had struck me. I was a little bit less sure. Obviously, I was sufficiently full of myself not to let anyone on, but it did affect me. And so I started looking at reading some quite in-depth philosophical arguments. I've read quite a lot about, you know, if you want to read about the problem of evil, go on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and read the entry there. I mean, there's a person that really doesn't want you to believe there's a God, you know. So there's a lot out there, so I read all the stuff. I had a good think about all of it, and what had happened is I was, at one point, having listened to lots, watched debates, listened, done all the stuff, I was I was lying in bed and I was thinking, and I was just thinking about the old cosmological argument, which for me, I don't know everyone buys it, but it's very powerful. Because it just says, look, at the beginning, what? There's a big question mark there. And a lot of people will just kind of roll their eyes, but if you really think about it, if you really meditate on what that means, you see, that the universe can't be past eternal, that there is something that exists, that is a cause, that is eternal, that is sufficient to create all that we see and more. You see, it must give you pause for thought. You've got to answer that. Every cosmologist knows it.
So the cosmological argument, Callum.
So William Lane Craig has a version of it.
William Lane Craig, that's it. It is, just explain, it's cause and effect, really, isn't it? So
yes, so it says that everything that comes into existence has a cause of its coming into existence. Yeah. The universe came into existence, therefore the universe has a cause, capital C, if you will. Right? And I'm from memory, but that's the kind of formulation.
Yeah.
So things that begin have a reason for beginning.
Yeah.
You see, the universe began, so it has a reason, it has a cause. It didn't just pop out of nowhere.
So I see my teacher. He doesn't say, well, that's just appeared on you. It's like, you know, it's been manufactured and sent over, and I gone to a shop, you know, and
exactly.
It didn't just appear.
Exactly. So there's lots of formulations of it. I'd watched a few. Craig's is the simplest, but there's others which are more subtle, and, you know, you can think about them, you can read them, but for me, I was just thinking about that and letting it sink in, because sometimes and this is where your talk about leaving the realm of the intellectual and entering the more experienced realm. Sometimes you know things up here, but maybe you don't know them in there, right? And sometimes you just got to sit on an idea, you got to chew over that idea and let it kind of work its way through so that you see its reality in a new way. And I think sometimes it's a bit like when, the idea of riding a bike versus riding a bike, or the idea of writing a book versus actually writing a book, which I've never done, by the way. But, I'm just saying, like, sometimes there's an idea of something, you understand it, but there's a difference to understanding something and knowing it. And knowing it not just up here, but in there. And I think it was just a process. I was chewing that over for days and days. And one day I was laying it, this just hit me very powerfully. So powerfully that God is there. You see? God is there. Here right now.
Mm-hmm.
That everything that you see, everything that's come into being, everything at all, is there because of this God. It just hit me so powerfully. Mm-hmm. And I felt, you see, God for the first time in my life. I was lying there and I felt it. And simultaneously felt a lot of other things which I'd never felt before. It was quite impactful for me. And it unlocked an awful lot in my thinking, because it hit me that it wasn't wish fulfillment.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, oh, I really wish there was a God. It really wasn't. To be honest with you, I was quite happy, because it suits my character to be smug and be right and go, well, these people are deluded and I'm not. That suits me just fine, but the reality was I was wrong. Yeah. I hadn't looked at the evidence properly, and when I did, and I examined the case, I could see that, well, at the very least, it's very, very, very reasonable to believe that God is real. But for me, that extra knowing of thinking, no, I think God is real, and I think it's warranted, and I think that every argument I've heard against it doesn't really stack up to me. I've never heard anyone argue for, oh, God's just not real, and convince me on any level. Because to be convinced or convinced is not a refutation. So someone goes to you, I'm not convinced. You go, oh, good for you, but why not? Yeah. If they can't tell you why not, they're not telling you anything. So I've never, people say, what about this? And I've never felt like I could never say, oh, I don't know. I always say, well, yeah, but there's a reason for this, there's a reason for that. But I couldn't get beyond just this first cause. It's just such a powerful, and I think it's worth meditating on that and thinking that through, because I think as you consider it, as you chew it over, as you let it sink in, it's a really powerful understanding. It's something that we don't really, as humans, I don't think we can understand. We don't create in that way. Yeah. It's just a big leap of the imagination.
But that's kind of like Pascal, isn't it? It's like you discovered in that moment that there is a God, but then there's a leap from God to Jesus.
Yes, that's right.
So how did that did your childhood suddenly, like, all this stuff make sense, like your worldview changed, and like actually in the Bible and all this, or was it different? Did that influence you? Or I
think it did influence me. And this is interesting, because I have been thinking about that. I was thinking, why? And I think my family had something to do with it, because my father and my grandfather and my aunt, by the way, who's an endowed chair of theology, they're all very, very devout and very intelligent Christians. So I thought, well, maybe there's something to it. And I was drawn to that. But I think I remembered the kind of core of the gospel. Mm-hmm. I understood that other religions had a subtly but important different proposition. So all religions say, be good. Yeah. Don't be horrible. Right? They all say that, right? Fine. And so people look at that and go, see, all religions asking the same thing. Mm-hmm. But you see, they're not. Because every other religion I've looked at, and I have looked at other religions, will say, well, be good, because that way you'll get X, Y, Z. Yeah. Well, be good and you'll get this. Or be good and you'll appease the river fairies or Zeus or whatever capricious deity you believe in. Yeah? And what I saw again and understood better now was that Christianity is not actually saying that. Yeah? It's saying that you be good and nothing will happen. You see? Because it's the goodness that you have and that anybody has actually doesn't bridge the separation. Yeah. It's not like, oh, we're just there, we just need to reach a bit further. We're I think we're separated, and I think you understand that. You look around, and you all sense humans. We have this capacity to be so good and so loving, but then you look around and you think, how is it? You speak to individual people, and you see the love and the care, but then you aggregate it up, and it just falls apart. Yeah. I could just see the separation, and it's the only religion where God just reaches out. You see, and says, I will bridge the gap. I will do what's sufficient, and all you have to do is repent, which just means turn towards, really. It means be changed, and face me, and all will be well, you see? And if you don't, you've made your choice. Yeah. And that struck me as that's just so profoundly different. Again, it's one of those things that we don't think about it now because we're kind of used to it. But if you just stop for a minute and think, hang on a minute. Every other religion says, I have to earn it, I have to appease.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, there's hints of that in the early parts of the Bible. And all through it, it's like, no. You see, that's not what it's about.
Yeah.
I know that's the kind of pattern, but that's not actually what it's about. You see, I will do what's sufficient. I will bridge this gap. All you've got to do is... And to be fair, I don't believe we're God's puppets.
Yeah.
We're here to do something meaningful. Turning towards God is not always easy. And, we live real lives here, where what we do really matters. We don't live in some kind of playground life. We live the real deal here. And so we do have to do something important, but that thing is to put our trust and turn towards God. And it's God who reaches out and does what is sufficient. And it just struck me, again, so radically different to everything else that's out there, but also struck me as loving in the kind of real way. Because, I've heard that distinction between loving someone and being nice to them. Because you can be nice to someone who you really don't like. So being nice is not the same thing.
Yeah.
I love my kids, love them, do anything for them. But sometimes you have to not be that nice. Sometimes you got to go, no, you can't do the thing you want to do because that's not what's right for you. You see, love's different from nice. And again, it struck me as the right loving. You bridge the gap, you bring justice, you reach out. And I found it just so compelling.
Yeah.
And so then that led me to look more carefully at the whole Jesus question. Did he exist? Is it warranted to think? Is it just, he's an inspiring guy? But again, if you read the book of John, if you read any of these things and you see what this man was saying, you can't really just go, well, this guy was just a nice...
Yeah.
I mean, you read a good chunk of the book of John is just Jesus going around going, I'm the Messiah, well, he didn't say the Messiah, but he just goes, I'm the chosen one. Basically, he's got, if you read between the lines, you can see what he's saying, and people were getting very cross with him. Mm-hmm. Some disciples leave.
So camera just had a moment, but we will carry on. Will was in full flow.
I was in full flow. I broke the camera. Sorry.
You broke the camera. So
right. No. All I was saying is that when you read it, I could just see these kinds of claims. People aren't going to believe it unless something extraordinary happens. They're just not going to buy it. I am the Father. I'm listening. I'm a direct link to God, people. I've got it all. Because loads of people have said that through history. I've read case studies. Yeah, and you cannot get thousands of people to change their lives for it unless something incredible's happened. You see?
But that's the thing. There's a lot, and people don't necessarily understand this. There was a lot of preachers out there at the time going around proclaiming they were the Messiah.
Oh yes, there
and
was
people
a few,
following them.
Yes, there was quite a few Messiahs.
And when they died, that was the changer. That was the big thing. You can say that you're the Messiah. You can do these things. You can start compelling, but the big thing was the
the purpose of the Messiah is understood in first century Judaism. And I'm not an expert on this. Go read N.T. Wright or someone like that. But the whole role is you kick the Romans out. You create the new kingdom. You reinstate Israel. You see, the Messiah that doesn't do that isn't the Messiah. Nice try. Wow. Next. Right? And so in a sense, it only stacks up if they had some experience, something quite serious. And I just, again, when you read it, and I read a few books, and I think, again, if God exists, if you think about, again, a cause of the universe, you look at teleology, you look at how finely tuned everything is. If you start to meditate on that, and you see that this universe is massive, it's wondrous, it's awe-inspiring, and it's all just been created by the divine, then if you think that's true, then resurrection is not really a problem. You see, so it's like just if you accept that there's a God that can do that and this shape this universe to allow us to have this kind of conversation that we're having now. Really, then Jesus coming back from the dead is trivial. It's possible. It's doable. It's not like out of bounds anymore. Well,
that's the thing, isn't it? If there is a God, we don't live in a closed universe. So as an atheist, the universe starts, nothing happens, and it closes. But then the resurrection points to there is a God because it's open. Because God can come down and say, I'm going to change the normality of this by doing this. So you pray for someone, they get healed. That's God kind of, in a sense, saying, well, who does it point to? It points to this person had cancer, they were supposed to die. The cancer's gone. It points to God because the universe is different to what we thought.
To what you assumed. Exactly. So that was the thing. And again, I looked at that, and again, I found it compelling because, again, it wasn't like, again, other teachers say, do what I say, you'll be saved by your actions. Follow my teaching. And Jesus says, no, follow me. I am the truth, the way, and the life. And again, I love all the Jesus stories. I think the parables just wormed their way into your mind. And again, it just resonated with me. And I got to a point where I thought, I think I believe this. I can see it working. I've studied old cultures. I've studied oral history. I've looked at these things. I know, when you read this sort of stuff, you think, hang on, because people tend to think now, people in the past were all just kind of simple people. They didn't get it. You see, people have this misconception. But if you ever do any serious archaeology or serious historical research, you know that's false. It is not true. It is not true that people in the past were idiots. Not at all. If anything, you may find that they may well be a little bit more dynamic and more resourceful than we are now, because they had to have their wits about them in a way that we probably don't have to, at least in the West. Okay, so this idea that all these people are just simpletons and it's just us clever people. I mean, the name of the Enlightenment says it all, doesn't it? We're the enlightened ones. Look at all these simple idiots out there living their simple lives, but we get it because we're smart. But again, if you look back at what it takes to nap a flint, I've actually done it. It's not easy. Doing these things is not easy. People in Neolithic were digging tunnels and mining things using tools that we would think were not up to the job, and doing it just fine. So people at that point knew, they understood, and they knew what to put their trust in and what not to, just as well as we did. They were not all superstitious in the way that we like to paint them. And a lot of that stuff is kind of propaganda from the Enlightenment period, who want to paint people in the past as fools so that we more readily accept the new way of thinking that they brought about, which, by the way, it's not all bad. I'm not saying that rationality is bad. I'm not saying that we don't have value from that. But I'm saying that every period has its propaganda, and I think it unfairly taints people in the past. So I looked at that and thought, you know what, I don't actually have a problem believing this, and I think it's the most compelling thing I've read. It's the most compelling vision of God that I see, and it works for me, it gels for me. And the more I felt that, the more I started to feel the Spirit. And then once I felt it, I thought, I think I'm there. So I stood up in the church, and we went the whole 9 yards, and I recommitted my life to Christ. But it was a process. But for me, the starting point is understanding the reality of God. For me, because for me, because without that kind of force in the universe, the rest of it kind of, right? How can you, so you got to think to yourself, at the core, is there God? And I think everyone ought to ask themselves that question and really chew it over, think about it. Because I realized I thought about my career very hard. I thought about the human brain very hard. Why have I done that? I'm not going to be a brain surgeon. I'm just putting all this effort into understanding because I'm curious. I thought about the cosmos. I'm not going to be an astronomer. Why am I bothering? So then it kind of, so if you're going to do those things, you want to put your mind to this question and really chew it over and give it the dignity it deserves.
But then that's like exactly, and it's any question, isn't it? Because it's exactly what I did. I believe that Jesus, he's just another. He's just like, we had Boudicca in the UK, in England. You had Hannibal with the Romans. It's just someone else rising up, and it's our friend, and he's a mutual friend of ours. He just said to me, and he said, Dan, Jesus wasn't rising up against the Romans. And my whole argument of Jesus is because I had this kind of, this is what I think, and the Bible isn't reliable, and I never looked into that. It's like, so, the thing is, it's like, there's fundamental questions you need to ask yourself, but if you're arguing against Christianity and you're using arguments, I mean, Jan, it really annoyed me. In one swoop, he wasn't fighting against the Romans, and I just went and looked, and I was like, oh my, I've been using that for like 10 years.
And that's why they were so cross with him. And you're right about the reliability question. This is a misconception that's out there that, the New Testament was written centuries later. Really, the evidence for that's very shaky now, and if you look into it properly, it doesn't take much looking to realize how well attested those events are. Believing whatever you want. The idea that they were written centuries later is false. That's been falsified. It's not true. And the idea that what we have now doesn't accurately represent what was written is also false. I think we're talking, it rather than is, or little changes, nothing very substantial. There might be one or two things we were uncertain about, but when I looked at it quite carefully, I saw nothing whatsoever behind that. So I think that's right, but I think again, it's that counterintuitive culture which Jesus brings. He says, blessed are the meek. The culture at the time was not blessed are the meek, blessed are the powerful, right? And again, we take it now for granted because we live in this kind of, in the shadow of Christendom, so we have this, of course, people who are vulnerable deserve a voice. Of course, victims deserve a voice, but that's not necessarily the normal way. It's not necessarily an instinct. I know that people naturally do have compassion for each other. But that compassion isn't necessarily extended to outside your tribe, outside what you need to survive, outside what benefits you. That's not necessarily the case. So, I think it was quite radical.
Well, it was, because listen to Dominion, brilliant
Yes.
book at the moment, and there's only a couple of cultures around that time, a Germanic tribe and another who wouldn't leave their babies to die by the roadside, who like go, oh no, we've got a girl, let's get rid of her. But it's quite normal to kill your baby, and in a way, and it become part of some of them's religion, and and it's Christians who come along and said, no, we're going to say, it's so counterculture.
Yeah.
You're supposed to let them die. Keep slaves down.
It's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
They felt it was the right thing to do to get rid of these excess babies.
Yeah.
The Roman mindset. In fact, there's an anecdote, archaeological anecdote. I remember my wife, Eddie, was working on a time team, I think. I don't know if she was at the site or whether she assisted, I can't remember. They had the TV crew there, and they found this neonate burial, a baby, in a rubbish tip, basically. And one of the people at a TV program was going, oh, I can just see this, sad person, maybe just laying this baby to rest, that kind of thing. And, one of the project managers for the company to work for, Tim Allen, who's a very straight talker, he went, I see no evidence for that whatsoever. It's quite common for people to toss babies out with the rubbish when they didn't want them. Yeah. And he was right, and that's just, he's a secular man just making a straightforward point.
Yeah.
At that time, it's just not accepted that, we ought to have compassion on things. No, you do what you need to preserve what you think is important. Yeah. And other things that get in the way are just in your way, get them out of your way. Yeah, so again, I can see the transformative power Christianity's had. Yeah, it's got things wrong. Everyone gets things wrong. The point of Christianity isn't that, we become Christians, we become perfect. The point of Christianity is that you understand that nobody is perfect. That's the whole point. You see, other religions say, oh no, but the holier you get, the more awesome you are. Yeah. And if you, I think, understand the gospel properly, you understand that's actually false. You see, in a way, you become more aware how distant you naturally are from God and how much more in need of God's grace you are, no matter how good you are.
Okay, so how did that, you alluded to and kind of said earlier about who you were at the time, and, so what is it like for you to, suddenly go and let God in, and did that kind of come to haunt you, or were you kind of were you enlightened in that sense of wow, actually I got things wrong, or what was that for you, internally, emotionally, from who you were to how Christ changed?
That's a good question. I've never asked myself that question, but I don't remember being distressed about it.
Okay.
Maybe that's a good thing. But I didn't have.
That's the grace of God.
Yeah,
it would destroy you.
I didn't. I just thought, gosh, I felt God's forbearance quite strongly, because what it does is it makes you think carefully about who you've been and who you are and your actions in a way that I just didn't think about in the past. Yeah. Just being honest. Okay? Yeah. I mean, I remember hearing a sermon by a guy said, because a lot of people think, well, I'm fine. I'm a good person. What's your problem? Right? And he said, look, imagine, and I'll update it. Imagine there's an app on your phone. Okay? Imagine that's easy enough. And the difference is the app's always on your phone, and if you get a new phone, you got to replace it. You got to put the same app on the same phone. And that app's always on your phone your whole life, and it records one thing. It records what you're saying, but only one thing. And that's what you think other people should do. Right? Oh, they should do this, or they shouldn't do that. Yeah. All through your life. And at the end of your life, you take all that, right? You list it out, and then you take your life and what you've actually done, and you measure it up against what you yourself said you ought to do, right? And see how you do. Mm-hmm. You see, and anyone I've mentioned that to, including when I heard it, I thought, oh, not very well. Not very well at all. Yeah. Right? And you think, if I can't even measure up to my own standard, you see, when you really think about it, you think, gosh, we are all in a bit of trouble here. We do need someone to reach out to us and give us grace. I think that's true. Yeah. And it's not saying, oh, you're all terrible people. It's just saying, guys, there's a real distance here between us and the divine, and that's only bridgeable through grace. Yeah. And I think I felt that really strongly. And so it just overwhelmed any pride I had. And I'm not saying I don't have pride. I'm just saying at that point, I was just so glad that we live in a universe that God would do that would give us that kind of grace.
It actually took me about, we went down to see you, and it took me about half an hour. We went for a walk, and
yes, you didn't quite realise, did you?
I was like, you got to imagine Will back in the day when he was, quite a stubborn atheist, and of a cat playing with a mouse. Just he knows you're going to kill, but first I'm going to play. And that's what you kept doing. And I kept thinking, and you kept saying, and we was in front, and our wives were behind with the kids, and you kept saying this, and I was like, "What? I'm waiting for the punch to come. You're just doing something here. I just wait for you." And I remember turning around to Ellie and saying, "Is this true? Is this Will's really found? This is like a huge thing." And it was, and it took a while to like really sink in. It's like, wow, this is in a nice way as well. It's like he's one of the toughest people I've ever come up against, and God's broke through. You know, it's like, well, even God can break. You know, not taking away from God in any way, but it's like in your heart He can reach, and this also you said about. Talk about giving books, lend books, giving books away. The Age of Reason by Tim Keller.
Oh yes.
I lent that to Ellie for her, and she kept it. And you moved, and it's one of the books
I did read that amongst many
that you
others.
Picked up, isn't it? And
that was very helpful.
And it's one of those that, you know, when you lend books, give them away. You know, because
it does help.
It was lent to Ellie, and it was one of the books that you read, which was helpful. You know. And I had books that I read which were helpful. Lee Strobel's Case of Christ, the Cold Case of Christianity was later, but Cold Case of Christianity is a good one. Talk about the reliability of the Bible and stuff. And Who Moved the Stone was another brilliant one. Reading books and giving those as resources to people is just able to help. But it was a very profound moment for me to kind of realise, and I was a bit on edge for a while. I was still shocked. I was like, "Oh my God, you are become a Christian."
I think I did tell you you were right, and I was wrong, and that's fine.
And that's it. But that is, isn't it? But that's what you're talking. Maybe going back to the last question. Actually, there is something there that you have recognised, like coming up and saying, you know, for you to say that before, like you were right and I was wrong, you know.
I accept that.
Yeah. And now, but that is the change of heart. That's the grace of God. That's the Holy Spirit coming into your life and actually saying, you go to certain people, I suppose, and I've done it, and like I was like that. Well, I'm a Christian now, and you know, I remember phoning a friend and saying, "I'm a Christian now." Yeah. He's like, "Great, I've been praying for you." So,
it's a good point. And actually, the point there is the world generally wants you to just assume. You know, so a lot out there just wants you to assume that this is all fanciful. Yeah. And the point of giving a book is not to try and it's just to get you to think a little bit about it. And I guess as I read these, I thought I haven't really thought about this. You see, and I thought about a lot in my life, and I hadn't really thought about this. So I guess that's the kind of a key point there that maybe comes out of my experience.
But isn't it Christianity though that is the one main thing that people don't? I find. Continually, people will think about the deepest things and worldviews and this, and you get to Christianity and there's not much thought to be in there. And it's and we grew up in a land which is Christian, and you grew up as well, and growing up in the States later in life, which would overtly say we are a Christian country, and yet we don't. It's one of the probably because it is true, you know, and there is something there that people don't, as we were saying before. You just didn't look at those questions. You looked at everything else. But we just kind of...
Yeah, I think if you look carefully at what Jesus is asking of people, it's profoundly against what is preached out there in the world. And I mean preached by commercialism, by and I'm not an anti-capitalist, I'm not like that way inclined necessarily, but I'm just saying, look at any ad, look at any commercial. It's telling you a story about your worth, about what's worthwhile, about what's important. And you see, the world says, no, acquire success, and that will give you meaning, and it will fulfill you, and you will be happy like these people in this ad. Yeah, and that's and the thing is, we think, oh yes, but it's just an ad. But no, it's not just an ad, because these, you know, we're storytelling creatures, humans. You know, we understand ourselves by the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. Yeah. You know, the narratives we're part of, the national narrative, the family narrative, the tribal narrative, whatever it may be. Oh, we always do X, we always do Y. And I think the narrative at a societal level is very commercial, it's very consumeristic. And the Christian message is quite harsh on that mentality. It's not to say that you can never have things, that's not the message, but the things will never fulfill you is the message. That is a dead end. And the thing that will fulfill you is denying yourself, dying to yourself, really. And that's tough. And I think maybe people understand that about it at a kind of fundamental level, and they just go, no thanks.
So
I'd rather not.
what was
I don't know.
fulfilling you then before? What was your?
I think this played into my character. I was a little bit. What fulfilled me is my idea of my own cleverness. I was a bit full of myself, and it's not to say one can't think they're smart. That's fine. It's not. Humility is not telling yourself you're terrible at things, but yeah, what fulfills you is then your success or your achievement.
Yeah.
And I think those things are good. Like I'm proud of the things that I have achieved. There's nothing wrong with that. And I do want to achieve other things, and there's nothing wrong with that either. But ultimately, I know that those things are actually ultimately not what's going to fulfill me.
Mm-hmm.
You see, that kind of fulfills maybe something qualitatively different to just getting a thing. You're getting an identity. You're getting a new story. A story that speaks of hope, that speaks of grace, that speaks of forgiveness, as opposed to a story that speaks of, meaninglessness, nihilism, and accumulation of stuff.
Yeah.
When you think about it, the universe is just vast. It's vast beyond all imagining. Actually, I read in a book once, you can't even render the solar system to scale in a book. It's impossible. Because the sizes just don't work.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be able to see it. It's just so huge, you see. And some people think that's a bit unsettling. They think, we're just this tiny speck in this vast universe. But you see, what it tells me is that God uses the whole of the universe just to get to us.
Yeah.
He uses all the stuff you see and more just to have connection. Whereas we're the reverse. We will trample all over people to get more stuff. You see? And so for me, that, again, is really...
And I find that I remember thinking about the vastness of the universe and time as well, and my place in that, and then just such a speck in the grand scale, and then going, and God knows me.
Yes.
I mean, like I know I'm not lonely.
Yes.
I'm not forgotten.
Yes.
Because ultimately you can lose everything, but God's there in the whole of thing, personally, and that's it was one of the presidents of the States. I can't remember. I think the first, Second World War. I can't remember which one it was now. And every year, one of my friends would go. I don't know if you heard the story, and they would look at the universe, and they would point out different constellations. And once you finished, they would look at each other and go, "Do you feel quite small now?" And it wasn't like to take away anything they were. It was to feel their place, and that actually we can grow bigger than ourselves, and actually we're not, and that's not a bad thing. Because in that you can be nothing, but you are something to God as well. So this is the whole thing going on in the, and again, which do you think that we of a culture now, maybe more than any other time, that don't think? Not that we don't think, but actually there's our phones and TV and entertainment and other stuff that is taking away that ability to really truly think.
Maybe. I think there is a lot of thinking that happens, but it's a very particular kind of thinking.
Right.
It's a thinking that's geared towards acquisition. It's a thinking towards solving very specific problems, and it's a thinking that is quite subdivided and specialized. You see, so in the past you might have someone that might contemplate all these things, whereas now it's like, well, no, I've got the microbiologist over here, I've got the physicist over there, and I've got these guys over there, and they're working on quite nuanced and quite important. I'm not denigrating them, I'm just saying it's a different quality of thought.
Yeah.
And I think then those of us that aren't delving into that maybe think, well, that's all being sorted. I don't have to really think about architecture. I don't have to really think about these sorts of quasars or quarks, whatever it is. I could just sit here and entertain myself. Great, acquire stuff, or maybe do my job, and that's fine. So I think in that sense, I think that's where people find it uneasy. Because I think sometimes conversations, you get some people say, well, people don't think anymore.
Yeah,
and then other people say, well, obviously we're advancing in science. What do you mean we don't think anymore? And I think that's where it comes from. Actually, it's, there's a section of the population which are thinking, but their thinking maybe is a little bit more specialized and not as synthetic, perhaps, as it could have been. And it may be that that's structural. It may be that the questions that are being asked are just, it's quite complicated now to get to grips with these things, and it's very difficult to be able to absorb the detail, but then also step back, and it's it's not easy to do. And then but that specialization means that people lose skills. And so I think Yes and no. Depends on how you look at it. Doesn't it?
Yeah.
So I think maybe for those of us that in the past might have been inclined to grapple with the Bible, grapple with metaphysical questions, because we've got these scientists kind of giving us this view of reality, we think, well, we don't have to worry about that. They've thought about it, and so I don't have to worry myself too much about it.
Yeah.
And I think the God question sometimes falls under that. Well, someone else thinks it, so I can just not worry about it myself. And I think that's the point where you got to stop. Some questions you can't delegate to other people.
Yeah.
Some questions are for you to answer for yourself. And I think the God question is first and foremost in that.
And what about the worldview? What about people's worldview? I think that's an important, how people see the world. You know, I've done a video of this before about what worldviews, and my worldview as an atheist was, you know, we come from nothing, but when I die, I'm going to see my parents.
Really?
You know, because I lost my parents, they were dead. My
Yes.
overwhelming thing is wanting to be with them and see them. But it didn't fit my worldview. My worldview wasn't coherent, it wasn't consistent. If we come from nothing, we go to nothing.
Yes.
But my thing was like, well, we come from nothing, but that's where we get. And it's like, what about, you know, people's worldviews and thinking about that, because they can be all over the place, you know. Where do we come from? What's the reason for life? And what happens when we die? Those are like three of the main biggest questions of life, because we are born, we live and we die.
Yes.
But they can't be...
I think, yes, and I think often nowadays people talk about the retreat of religion. And I think that's a retreat of maybe organized religion.
Yeah.
Most people out there that I speak to and know aren't hard atheists, actually. Most of them are kind of on the agnostic spectrum, or they'll talk about a vague spiritualism or spirituality, things like that. And then they can sort of straddle. They can kind of deny one thing and maybe hope for the other.
Yeah.
And not really press it too hard. I know there are a lot of atheists who have thought through their position and go, no, we are dust to dust, ashes to ashes, that kind of thing, and that's fine by me. Okay, great. You know, I don't really have a problem with that. But it's just, yeah, I think a lot of people aren't encouraged to put a huge amount of effort. We don't teach philosophy in secondary school, I don't think. It's,
No.
you know, it's not something that's encouraged. It's not something that people tend to think of as important. People say, well, no, study math, study English, study science. Those are the things that are important. The other stuff you just drop.
Yeah.
See, and again, that's part of the story. They go, well, don't worry about that stuff. That doesn't matter. What matters is this. Yeah, and by inference, your utility. You see, that's the thing that gives you value. How useful will you be? Will you be an engineer? Fantastic. Will you be a doctor? Great. That means that you're something, you see. And again, that's why I find Christianity compelling, because that's not what makes you something. It really isn't. It's not bad to be a doctor. It's not bad to be an engineer. It's good. It's fine. But you see, if you read Sermon on the Mount, if you read the Bible, the challenge is to accept and value the person in the street who has nothing as much as you respect and value anybody else. And maybe not trust them to be your dentist, but esteem them as a human and acquire, you know, give them the same dignity.
Yeah.
I once pointed out to my daughter, and she's very smart, and she went, well, who does that? Who does that?
Yeah.
And I said, there you go, you've got it. Nobody does that. Nobody can do that. And that's why we need grace.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Looking at Christians of the past, you can go Francis of Assisi or Martin de Tours, so people who had something in them. I think Martin de Tours was a soldier and doing quite well, and he gave everything up, and he was quite bedraggled, and Francis of Assisi, she'd like taking all his clothes off and saying that's it. People who do the opposite to what culture, they're the ones we remember.
Yes, that's
These are the ones who go down as the greats, as it were.
Yes.
Christianity is like, wow, look at, and there's nothing that we can't do either. That's the scariest thing. It's like, no, you can do exactly that. It's like, what, really? Just give everything up? I can't do that. But it's the counterculture. That's what I love. It's the counterculture, especially at the time where there were such differences within their countries and the culture and the economic situations at those times and those periods. You got these people saying, like, I'm looking at the Bible and this is what it's saying. You know, and we remember them. Because what? They became poor. And a poverty which is not a physical poverty to the world. They're just going, that's crazy what you're doing. You're giving up your wealth and they're going, no, but I'm gaining heaven.
Yes.
It's
in the sacrifice, you see.
Yeah.
Jesus said, it's by losing your life that you will find it.
Yeah.
You see, so it's that kind of...
And for those who do the least...
Yeah.
To one of these is doing it to me.
Yes,
You know, Martin de
that's
Tours
right.
cut his winter cloak because he saw a beggar. You know, it was like you help people in your own town. He was in a different town and he cut his winter cloak in half, cut half for himself and he gave it the other half. It's like, what are you doing? Not even, you know. But he's remembered. That's one of the biggest things he's remembered for, because you know it's countercultural. You know,
Yes.
look after yourself.
Yes.
Keep yourself warm. It'll snow.
And to be fair, it that comes, self-preservation is not a bad thing.
No.
You shouldn't deny yourself, decent clothes or whatever, but again, it's giving equal priority. And that's the challenge, I think, of the gospel we really read, is are you really able to love your neighbor as yourself? It presumes that you really esteem yourself and you care for yourself, but then you understand that your neighbor, meaning everybody else in the whole world, deserves the same love and esteem as everybody else. In fact, one of my favorite scriptures is in Matthew 22, when, one of the teachers will kind of come up, as they always do in the New Testament, to kind of prod and test Jesus, and they go, what are the two greatest commandments? And Jesus says, well, the first is love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your mind and all your soul. This is the first and greatest commandment. And then he says, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. You see, it doesn't just go, no, he says, look, there's a connection. That in loving your neighbor, it's like loving God, God's self, right? There's a sort of, you're replicating the divine in doing it. And it's so foundational and so important. And if you really want to live it out, I'll admit, it's tough for anybody to live it out, you see. But that's the level of the challenge, and that, again, demonstrates how far we really are from earning anything. And it's okay, because, again, God's reached out to us. You see, that's why it's so compelling.
So what is it? What's the next step? You're a Christian. What is God calling you? You go to church now. Your family go to church and committed and amazing. Like you pray for us. We're like, wow, this is just so different now. It's that. But what is it now? What's this life? You become a Christian, but what is it?
Yes. So a big part for us was not just going, okay, well now we've joined a new club, and we've just decided.
Again, speaking so much, the battery went, but we're back now. So what is it in your life now as a Christian? How's it changed? What's the future? What's it mean, ultimately?
Yeah, to be a Christian as opposed to not. We were quite keen to not have a life that was just another club that we joined, that it's just like, oh, okay, we're going to go to church now, we're going to sing, and we're going to listen to theology, but actually our lives aren't that different. We're still going to work, still doing the same stuff that we did before. We were quite keen to find the way that we would live out our faith and be helpful to other people. And I want to, do a video like this or provide any insight that I can from my life, because for a long time I lived thinking I knew. You see, thinking I understood the world, thinking I thought about it, and then realizing I just hadn't thought about it in the way that I thought I had. I hadn't given it a proper examination. And I think people owe it to themselves to have a look and see, is the universe really the way they think it is? Have they really given themselves a chance to think about it? And I just want to encourage people to do that, because at the end of it, you may find you're surprised, at what you find. Yeah. And I think that it's so important for people to give themselves that chance.
Did you, but did you ever have a moment? I did, because I was for many years thinking God killed my dad, and an awkward moment when you kind of had a little conversation with God. I was like, I know you didn't kill my dad, but I put so much on you that I'm really sorry for what I did. Did you sorry God, because I was put myself above you, and because I had to say it more for me. I know God doesn't want my apology, but I was I just need to say sorry to you, because you showed me such grace and such love, and I've said such bad things about you, and I just want to apologise for that. And I know you don't want that or accept that, but did you ever feel
well, yeah, a little bit, because I remember as an older teenager, when I started to have doubts, I felt God was being silent towards me. And I didn't see God acting the way I wanted God to act. I was like, give me a break, dude, kind of thing. And I got a bit cross at first. And eventually that started to tilt into, well, hang on a minute, maybe God's not listening because there is nothing listening to me. And that drifted me. And that's kind of one of the things that started, and that's what made me more receptive when I then went to university to start looking at other ways of looking at the world. And I felt, like I said, when I had that moment, when I was understanding the reality of God, I did feel quite strongly, look, there is your answer. You see, in a sense, it was that maybe God understood me well enough to know that I wouldn't really be able to accept it until I got to a certain point. I don't really know. But I did ask for forgiveness, but I knew it had been given me.
Yeah.
Because I knew it from the forbearance that God had shown me.
Yeah.
and you know, and again, that's there for everyone, because nobody, you know, again, we sometimes think we want the world to be different. We sometimes think, no, the world really sucks. Come on, you know, it's not fair, whatever. But actually, the world is built in such a way to allow us to really lead a life that means something, where your kindness to people actually matters, where your love towards them actually makes a huge difference to their well-being. And actually, if you dislike someone, it also makes a really horrible mess of things. And so your intention, your action, your very being matter, you see. And in that kind of world, I think a lot comes down to how are you going to respond? How much effort are you going to put in? I mean, are you even going to try? Some people will spend hours and hours and hours playing a video game or reading books that don't teach you anything, or, you know, fiddling around with something. You see, you spend hours doing that, you see. And that's where your heart is, fine. But again, you know, I didn't understand when I was younger, and I've started to understand now that there's a little bit of effort involved. That, you know, God doesn't want us to just be puppets, little people that just get told what to do. You know, tiny kids. We're like sons and daughters in the kingdom. And we're people that have real roles to play.
Well, with kindness with Christ. I mean, like, you know what I mean? That's huge. It's like, but Jesus, no, you're there. You're up there. That's how important you are. Going back to the universe and time and spirit. No, you're co-heirs with Christ. You know, if you are, you're there. The angels are going to listen to you. Like,
maybe not me.
No,
I
mean, but like, really. I'm that important, and this is the thing of the gospel, isn't it? It's like, I'm really that important, and how we fail to get that across and communicate such.
Just think about it. The world as it is means that you saying a kind word to somebody at the right time has tremendous power.
Yeah.
It can transform someone's life. And as Christians, we ought to be thinking about that, I think, every day. I know that no Christian's perfect, no one's perfect, you know, and we all fail, but, you know, that's what we aim for. We aim to be transformed in the image of Christ, and we aim to do better each day, and we aim to reflect as best we can the love that Jesus has shown us. So, I think, at the minute, we're just exploring, you know, is it teaching? How do we reach out? How do we share hope with people? That's really what it's about, and provide comfort to people. So we're thinking about, well, we've got some ideas. It feels a bit embryonic to broadcast, but we are.
I think it's
we are thinking hard about what we might do that has that provides caring, that provides support, that provides hope, and provides a means of grasping that hope, of getting hold of it in a way that's accessible and easy for people that had doubts like I had, that felt the world wasn't the way it ought to be, and help them see it maybe in a better way.
And there's a huge thing, we've been talking over the past couple of days, and that whole journey and doors opening and doors closing and it's discerning God's will on your life is actually huge, and the trust in Him, and you think about now where you are and about where you were 10 years ago. What's that change? What are the two different worlds that people would see in that sense now?
I don't know. I mean, most people have told me that, perhaps I have a little bit of a kinder voice. And I don't think they necessarily mean the timbre of my voice. Yeah. I think they mean the sense in which I understand now. Maybe, the process has taught me that Will Bedford's all-knowing, which, some people don't need to be told, but, maybe I did. But also that, there's a real value that is beyond just what you get from your actions, from your achievements, from your puffing yourself up.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes one shift in your thinking starts to percolate through your character. You see, because we have this, I think, a bit of an illusion in Western life that you see a lot of films where people are transformed by this big event. And I think that can happen. Mm-hmm. But I think when you look at it, because again, I remember that moment when I was lying in bed and I felt my thinking change. But actually, that moment didn't happen on its own. You see, lots of steps along the way happened. Yeah. And it's actually the little decisions you make every day that really shape your character. That's why a lot of the Old Testament talks about walking. There's a walk. There's a journey involved. So I think, it's about yeah, I think I've been trying to walk and shape my character over the years now into one which maybe just understands that, because that comes from that single shift in my understanding that actually I hadn't seen this thing. So maybe I need to understand other people's value. But again, it's one thing to just say, oh yeah, I get that other people are important.
Mm-hmm.
And it's another to experience the value they can give you.
Yeah.
You see, that really, that look, you've given me a gift. Eddie's given me a gift in terms of enhancing my understanding and giving me an understanding of my relationship with God, which I wouldn't have had probably on my own. And so that's really important for someone like me who maybe is a little bit more focused on what I would do about a situation.
Yeah.
And now maybe accept a bit more that it's not just about what I'm going to do, it's about what we're going to do. It's about what people do in partnership, it's about reaching out to other people. And yeah, it's given me that understanding. And I think that understanding maybe has changed how I present and how I see things, because when you shift something fundamental, other things flow from that shift in thinking. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It does. And bringing it full circle, going back to your family, who they're probably the most instrumental, given that foundational. In Argentina, really living out their faith out there and doing amazing things. How do you go back now? You didn't go back before and say, look, I don't really. But do you go back and have you told them your story?
Yeah. For my parents, to be fair, I don't know if I've sat down with them and spelt it out like I have with you now.
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry if you see this the first
this
time.
video for you to watch.
Yeah. But no, I have had a conversation. My mother was there when I kind of recommitted my life to Christ in the church, and I have made it quite clear that I was taking this seriously now. I don't know to what extent they understood the how far I had gone in my thinking from any kind of belief. And I don't know how much my aunts, uncles, grandparents, I don't know. Yeah. I just sort of thought, I bought into that whole, well, your belief is just your belief, and the external life, you just lead like everyone else, and that makes you a good citizen. I bought that whole thing. So, I was just incubating there. But it allowed me to now reconnect, I think, and start to grapple and really appreciate, understand who these people are in a new way. Because, one of the things that you get as you become towards middle age, I'm 41, so you kind of start to take a step back as well, and you think, because you think you know your parents, and you think you know your grandparents, and you think you know these people, but of course you know them as a child knows, you know them as a teenager knows, and then you go away and you live your life, and if you're lucky, you come back and really know them. You know them as adults, and I know that not everyone has that, and I know it's a real gift I've been given, and I so appreciate it. So, it's given me a chance, thank goodness, that I've had to kind of get to know them and grapple with a few issues with them and think things through, and I think they've been very grateful for that.
Your story just reminds me of Prodigal Son.
Does it?
Yeah, it does. You were there and then you went away. Okay, you didn't do what he did, but in your own way you did, and that's what the story is saying. You go off and then you come back to, like, I didn't have that. Mine's like the road to Emmaus. It's like it was always there through my life at Church of England school, and my mum was like Church of England. My dad was a Catholic. My mum used to clean the church even though she wasn't a Christian. I don't know why that happened. They're laying foundations, and then all these little snippets suddenly come, boom. But yours is very much like you were there. You were in the family, and then you just like, and then suddenly you come back to the Father, and it's just like, it just sounds like a real prodigal. And this is the beautiful thing, is that I can stand here and say, this is my testimony, I was an atheist, and this is how I came to faith. And you can say, this is my testimony, I was an atheist, and this is how I came to faith. And it's like, and it's very different things and very different ways. And that's another thing that compels me about Christianity, is like, if we all came one way, okay, this is alarm bells. This is it's a bit weird, but because we all come in different ways and these different experiences, and it's just like, well, and we hear each other's testimonies and go, well, that's amazing.
Yes, it is.
So we're coming to the same God. I know, but that's amazing. Because it's just like you come in such a different way, and it's so just like interesting to hear. Like you found the same thing that I found.
Yes,
but in a really different way.
And again, it's again echoing that different types of investigation of the same evidence gives you a similar answer. I'm saying, when you know something is a fact of life, is true, you should be able to look at it in different ways, from different perspectives, and actually kind of come to a similar conclusion.
Yeah.
And so I would expect that in
Well, the
Christianity, because
the truth doesn't change.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
truth is the truth, either way, the truth in life.
In the same way that if you found a pot from a certain date, it is a pot from a certain
Yeah,
date,
yeah,
and
yeah.
whichever method you use to get to that, you'll start to get answers that cohere.
Yeah.
So I'd expect it, if you've got Christianity and you've got certain facts about it, and people look at it from different perspectives,
Yeah,
in different
yeah.
ways, and they come to different conclusions.
Yeah.
I wouldn't expect anything different.
Very cool. Thank you so
Thank
much
you, Dennis. It's
for
so good to
joining.
speak to you,
and
as always.
and to share your testimony and be so open and
Yeah.
get some very philosophical stuff.
Well, a little bit.
Which is cool. And any books that we mentioned as well, and any books that you think will be cool for people, we'll put in the links below.
Yeah.
Because I think that's a huge thing to talk about books and helping. I think books are amazing because you just go, here you go, read this. Shut up. I'm not going to speak about this anymore. In
Yeah.
fact, that's what Jan, my friend, told me. He said, we went to the pub, he went, shut up, we're not going to speak about this anymore. Have a beer, tell me about your life, I'll give you some books.
Yes. Yeah, again, you mentioned Reason for God's very good.
Yeah.
Get you thinking. Tim Keller, New York pastor, pastor to the skeptics, they call them. Again, just to get you thinking. It's not to try and give you a hard time, make you feel bad. Just a few new ways of looking at the universe. That's quite good. Grace for Christ is, again, quite good. Very easy to read, straightforward. And those two will probably, Cold Case Christianity as well, but those two are pretty good. They should get you thinking.
Yeah.
And give you additional resources to then go out there and make up your own mind.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the idea.
And that's the thing. It's like, that's what I would say if I'm doing anything in church or a baptism or funeral or wedding is don't. This is me saying this, but don't just believe me. Go off and look at yourself.
Yes, that's right.
Go and look at the worst thing you can do is not look.
Mm.
And I think there's two people here who went off for different reasons and looked at the evidence and went, oh crap. It's true. It is, because I didn't want that. I didn't want to become a Christian, and it pushed me into a corner, and I had to face a lot of like believing that God killed my dad, and then I had to go through all that, and then called to be it was like, wow, this is for the best, by the way, for the amazing. But you look at the evidence, but it was about the thinking. If you don't think, if you don't look at the evidence, then more for you.
Yeah.
It's. Thank you.
Yeah, so good to speak to you, Dan.
Very cool.
Always.
All right.
Killer.
So yeah, and I think we'll be seeing Will a lot more here because there's so much more. Will is one of the greatest brains that I've known. It is true. It's true. And so he'll be definitely on in the future. So any comments you've got below, if they're for Will, and then put some comments below or questions or anything like that, and I can get them to him. So like the video because it gets to more people. Subscribe to the channel for more great content, and we will see you soon. Bye.